Olivia Grant sat at her desk, meticulously organizing the financial reports she had been analyzing for most of the day. Numbers and spreadsheets were her safe place, where everything made sense. But her mind kept wandering back to the conversation she'd had with her best friend, Rachel, just a few days earlier. "Come on, Olivia. You need a break from all this work. What's the harm in one blind date?" Rachel had insisted, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I'm not sure. You know I don't like surprises. And a blind date is the ultimate surprise," Olivia had replied, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "What if he's, I don't know, weird?" Rachel had grinned mischievously. "That's the fun part. Besides, I promise you, he's a great guy. His name's Ethan. He's tall, handsome, successful. He'll be the breath of fresh air you need." Now, as she looked at the clock on her computer screen, Olivia sighed. It was the night of the date, and her nerves were kicking in. She wasn't the type to be swept off her feet by romantic gestures. But maybe Rachel was right. Maybe she did need a change of pace. After all, the last time she went on a date was over a year ago, and it ended with the guy talking about his cryptocurrency portfolio for 2 hours. With a final glance at her neatly arranged files, Olivia shut down her computer, grabbed her coat, and made her way to the restaurant. The restaurant, La Lumiere, was more upscale than Olivia expected. The chandeliers overhead twinkled, casting a warm glow across the room, and the soft hum of classical music filled the air. She couldn't help but feel a bit underdressed, despite her best effort to look elegant in her simple navy blue dress. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she walked toward the hostess. Rachel's message flashed on the screen. "You're going to love him." Remember, tall guy in a charcoal suit. Olivia took a deep breath and approached the hostess. "Hi, I'm supposed to be meeting someone here. Ethan, I think? I'm not sure of the reservation name." The hostess smiled politely and scanned her list. "Ah, yes, table for 2. Right this way." As they weaved through the candlelit tables, Olivia tried to calm her racing heart. When they reached the table, a man stood to greet her. A man who certainly fit Rachel's description, though there was an undeniable intensity to him that caught Olivia off guard. "Olivia?" the man asked, his voice smooth and confident. He smiled, a charming, easy smile, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Yes, that's me. You must be Ethan?" Olivia asked a little hesitantly, though something about him felt off. The man chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "Not quite. My name's Ryan, but close enough." "Ryan?" Olivia blinked, her confusion palpable. "I'm so sorry. I think I was supposed to meet someone else." Ryan's smile didn't waver. "It seems we've had a bit of a mix-up, but you're welcome to stay if you'd like. I'm not waiting for anyone else." Olivia hesitated, glancing around the restaurant. She could have sworn the hostess mentioned the right reservation, and it seemed rude to just walk away. "You know what? Sure, why not?" she said, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. "Let's chalk this up to fate." Ryan gestured for her to sit, and they both settled in. The waiter appeared almost instantly, handing them menus. "Thank you for not running away the moment I wasn't the guy you were expecting," Ryan said with a light smile, once the waiter left. "Blind dates are stressful enough without surprises." Olivia couldn't help but laugh. "Honestly, this is probably the most exciting thing that's happened to me all week. I deal with spreadsheets and numbers all day, so I guess a little chaos is refreshing." "You work in finance?" Ryan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Analyst?" "Guilty," Olivia said, smiling a little. "And what about you?" "I run a tech company," he said casually, as though it was no big deal. "Of course you do," Olivia muttered under her breath. It was almost too perfect. Handsome, successful, and confident. Rachel was definitely going to have questions. Ryan chuckled at her reaction. "Is that bad? Should I have lied and said I'm a struggling artist instead?" No, it's not bad," Olivia assured him. "I'm just not used to, well, this. You seem like the kind of guy who's been on 100 fancy dates." "Not as many as you'd think," Ryan replied, a hint of something deeper in his tone. "Honestly, I'm not a fan of the whole dating scene. It feels too much like an interview process." "That's exactly how I feel," Olivia said, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "Like, we're all just sizing each other up, trying to see if someone ticks all the boxes." Ryan nodded. "Exactly. And by the end of the night, it's less about getting to know someone and more about whether they fit into your life plan." There was a moment of silence as their eyes met, and Olivia felt a strange connection with him, something she hadn't anticipated. Maybe this mistaken date wasn't such a mistake after all. "So, Olivia," Ryan said, breaking the silence, "what's your box-ticking criteria? What do you look for?" Olivia laughed softly, her nervousness fading as the conversation flowed. "Oh, the usual. Someone who can handle my obsession with spreadsheets, isn't too weird about my early morning coffee habit, and maybe someone who surprises me." Ryan grinned. "I think I might check at least one of those boxes tonight." Hours passed, and by the time the waiter brought the check, Olivia couldn't believe how fast the night had gone. Ryan was not what she had expected. He was intriguing, charming, and surprisingly easy to talk to. They both stood to leave, and as they stepped outside into the crisp night air, Ryan turned to her. "This was unexpected, but I'm glad we met," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Me too," Olivia replied, "even if it was a little unconventional." Ryan hesitated for a moment before smiling. "I know we met by mistake, but would you want to see me again? On purpose this time?" Olivia's heart fluttered unexpectedly, and she found herself nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." As Ryan hailed a cab, Olivia couldn't help but think about how strange and wonderful the night had been. She had come for a date with Ethan, but left captivated by Ryan. It wasn't until later, lying in bed, that Olivia realized just how much her life might have changed because of one mistaken identity. The first few weeks of marriage to Ryan Carter were a whirlwind for Olivia. She went from being an independent financial analyst with her own schedule to the wife of a powerful CEO, navigating a world of lavish parties, board meetings, and media attention. It was overwhelming at times, but Olivia found solace in her growing connection with Ryan, even though their relationship remained somewhat unusual. There was a silent understanding between them. From the moment they said, "I do," Ryan had been clear. There would be no intimacy beyond their daily routines and his goodnight kisses. He had explained his reasons vaguely, mentioning something about needing time, about being patient. And Olivia had agreed, even though she didn't fully understand it. But now, weeks into their marriage, she was starting to feel the weight of that silence. One evening, after yet another business dinner where Ryan had dazzled the investors with his strategic mind, they returned home to their sleek, modern penthouse. The moment the elevator doors opened into their private floor, Olivia kicked off her heels and sank into the plush couch. "You were amazing tonight," she said, watching Ryan as he loosened his tie and sat across from her. "I'm pretty sure those investors would have handed over their entire portfolios if you'd asked." Ryan gave her a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's just part of the job, but thanks." There was a pause. It wasn't the first time Olivia had felt it, this strange, unspoken distance between them, despite the fact that they were married and living together. The tension simmered in the quiet moments, in the spaces where conversation should have filled the void but didn't. "Ryan," Olivia hesitated, unsure if she should broach the topic that had been on her mind. "Can we talk about us?" Ryan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What about us?" "I don't know. This marriage, it feels like we're playing roles," she said carefully, searching his face for any sign of what he might be thinking. "We act like the perfect couple in public, but then when we're alone, it's like there's this invisible wall between us." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look away. "I told you from the beginning, Olivia, I need time. I don't want to rush into anything." "I know," she said quickly, not wanting to seem pushy. "And I've been patient, really. But it's just confusing. You kiss me every night, but that's all. And I can't figure out if you want more or if you're just keeping me at arm's length." Ryan sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "It's not about you. It's about me. I've been hurt before, and I don't want to make the same mistakes again." "Hurt before?" Olivia asked softly. "You never mentioned that." Ryan hesitated, clearly reluctant to open up, but after a long moment he spoke. "Years ago, I was engaged to someone. It didn't end well, and since then, I've had a hard time trusting people, especially when it comes to relationships." Olivia's heart ached for him. "Ryan, I'm not her. I'm not going to hurt you." "I know you're not," he said quietly, looking down at his hands, "but it's still hard for me to let someone in. That's why I made that vow before we got married. I didn't want to rush into intimacy, not until I knew for sure." "Knew for sure what?" Olivia asked, leaning forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan looked up, his gaze piercing. That I wouldn't lose myself in the process. There was a long silence between them, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Olivia didn't know what to say at first. She wanted to tell him that he didn't have to worry about losing himself, that she would be there for him no matter what. But she knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to convince him. She reached across the space between them, taking his hand in hers. You're not going to lose yourself, Ryan. We're in this together, remember? It's not just about you anymore. It's about us. Ryan stared at their joined hands for a moment before giving her a small nod. I know. I'm trying. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, the familiar routine played out. Olivia was already in her pajamas, pulling back the covers, when Ryan walked over to her side of the bed, as he did every night. He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her lips, lingering just long enough to make her heart skip a beat. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he were afraid of breaking something delicate. Olivia felt the warmth of his lips on hers, the brief connection sending a thrill through her. But as always, Ryan pulled away too soon, his expression unreadable. He stepped back, gave her a small smile, and said, "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Ryan," she whispered back, watching as he turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. As she lay there in the silence, Olivia couldn't help but wonder what it would take to break through the walls Ryan had built around himself. She knew he cared about her. His nightly kisses told her that much. But caring wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted all of him. For now, though, she had to be patient. They had made a silent pact, after all, and if it took time to earn his trust, she was willing to wait. But with each passing day, the question lingered in her mind. How long could she keep waiting? Weeks turned into months, and Olivia Grant found herself growing more comfortable with the rhythms of her new life as Mrs. Ryan Carter. Their marriage had settled into a pattern. Calm, predictable, yet still tinged with an underlying tension. Despite the distance that remained between them in certain areas, their partnership in business and public life was flawless. The world saw them as the perfect couple, poised, elegant, untouchable. But behind the scenes, there was a quiet war being waged within Olivia, one between her growing affection for Ryan and the invisible barriers he had erected. She could no longer ignore it. Every night, after Ryan kissed her and left the room, she was left wondering about the man she had married. She felt she knew pieces of him, the CEO, the strategist, the guarded but kind husband. But the man behind the mask, the one with wounds too deep to heal, remained a mystery. It wasn't until one evening, during a high-profile charity gala, that Olivia stumbled upon the key to understanding Ryan's aloofness. The gala was grand, held in a mansion with towering columns and chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. Olivia stood beside Ryan, her arm linked with his, as they mingled with other influential figures. The evening was going smoothly, as most of these events did, with Ryan handling the room like a seasoned professional. His hand occasionally brushed hers in a reassuring gesture, though his focus remained on the business at hand. As the night wore on, Olivia excused herself to get a drink, taking a moment to enjoy a rare breath of solitude. She had just taken a sip of champagne when an older woman approached her, a warm but knowing smile on her face. "You must be Mrs. Carter," the woman said, her voice smooth and practiced. "I've heard quite a lot about you." Olivia turned to face her, smiling politely. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" "I'm Margaret Lawson," the woman replied, her eyes twinkling. "Old family friend of the Carters." "Ah, nice to meet you," Olivia said, though she couldn't help but feel slightly on edge at the way the woman looked at her, like she knew something Olivia didn't. Margaret took a slow sip of her wine before continuing. "It's interesting to finally meet the woman who managed to capture Ryan's heart." Olivia's smile faltered for a second. Well, I'm not sure I'd say it like that." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Don't be modest, dear. Ryan isn't the easiest man to get close to. He's been like that ever since. Well, since her." There it was, that flicker of mystery Olivia had sensed but never fully understood. "Her?" Olivia asked, her heart beginning to race. "What do you mean?" Margaret's gaze shifted, and for a moment it seemed as though she regretted bringing it up. But then she sighed and leaned in slightly, as though they were sharing a secret. "Ryan was engaged years ago. I'm surprised he hasn't told you." "Engaged?" The words hit Olivia like a punch to the gut, but she kept her expression steady. No, he hasn't mentioned that. Margaret studied her carefully before continuing. It was quite the scandal, really. She left him for someone else, just a few weeks before the wedding. He hasn't been the same since. The woman's words were like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Ryan's emotional distance, his reluctance to trust, the vow of abstinence, it all stemmed from this painful betrayal. I see, Olivia said, her voice soft. Thank you for telling me. Margaret smiled sympathetically. You seem like a good match for him, dear. Just be patient. He's been through a lot. With that, Margaret gave her a reassuring pat on the arm and drifted away, leaving Olivia standing alone with her thoughts. The room around her seemed to blur, the voices and laughter of the gala fading into the background as she tried to process what she had just learned. Ryan had been engaged, and she had never known. Later that night, after they had returned home, Olivia couldn't keep the question from bubbling up. They were in the living room, Ryan flipping through emails on his tablet, while Olivia sat across from him, her thoughts still swirling. Ryan, she began, her voice hesitant but determined. Can I ask you something? He looked up from his tablet, his expression curious. Of course. What's on your mind? I met Margaret Lawson at the gala tonight, Olivia said, watching his face closely for any reaction. She mentioned something about your past, about an engagement. The room seemed to grow still. Ryan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, his gaze hardened before he quickly masked it. He set his tablet aside and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I see she's still spreading that story around. So, it's true? Olivia pressed gently. You were engaged before? Ryan sighed, his expression weary. Yes, it's true. It was a long time ago, and I don't like talking about it. Why didn't you tell me? Olivia asked, her voice soft. I feel like I've been trying to understand you, but this explains so much. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. Because it's in the past, Olivia, it's not something I want to dredge up. She left, and I moved on. Did you? Olivia asked quietly, her heart aching for him. Move on, I mean. Ryan's silence was answer enough. I understand now, Olivia said softly. I understand why you've been keeping your distance, why you made that vow. But Ryan, I'm not her. I'm not going to hurt you. Ryan looked at her, his eyes conflicted. I know you're not, but it's not that simple. Why isn't it? She asked, her voice filled with frustration and sadness. We're married, Ryan. I love you, and I want to be with you. But it feels like you're still stuck in the past, like you're still trying to protect yourself from something that's already over. Ryan stood up, pacing the room as if trying to shake off the conversation. You don't get it, Olivia. When she left, it wasn't just about her. I lost trust in everything. In myself, in people, in relationships. I can't just turn that off. Olivia rose from her seat, crossing the room to stand in front of him. She reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. You can trust me, Ryan. I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment, Ryan didn't say anything. He just looked down at her, his expression torn between wanting to believe her and the walls he had built to keep himself safe. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and filled with uncertainty. I want to trust you, Olivia. I do. But I don't know if I'm ready. Olivia nodded, understanding more than ever the depth of his pain. Then let's take it slow. I'm not asking you to change overnight, but let me in little by little. I'm here, Ryan. I'm not her, and I never will be. Ryan looked at her for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, he nodded. Okay, little by little. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but it was a start. And for the first time since their marriage began, Olivia felt like she had finally begun to unravel the mystery of Ryan Carter. And with that, they had taken their first step toward healing. The days after Ryan's quiet confession felt different. There was a shift between him and Olivia, subtle but undeniable. His walls were still there, but she could feel them weakening, brick by brick. Ryan was letting her in, slowly, cautiously, but the distance between them remained palpable, especially when night fell. Every evening after dinner and conversation, he would lean down, give her that same gentle kiss, then retreat to the guest room where he slept. It was a routine that felt both intimate and cold at the same time, as if he was afraid of taking the final step that would erase the boundary between them. Olivia tried to be patient. She told herself she could wait. But as the weeks stretched on, the frustration grew inside her like a vine, winding tighter with each passing night. She loved Ryan, but it felt like he was holding back from truly loving her in return. One evening, after yet another charity event that they had attended as a picture-perfect couple, Olivia decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. They had returned home, the sound of her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor as they walked through the front door. She was exhausted, not from the event, but from pretending that everything was fine when inside she felt like she was drowning in unanswered questions. Ryan was already loosening his tie, his usual post-event ritual, when Olivia finally spoke up. "Ryan, we need to talk." He stopped mid-motion, looking over at her. His eyes, usually calm and composed, flickered with a hint of unease. "About what?" he asked, though he likely knew exactly where the conversation was headed. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "About us. About this wall that's still between us." Ryan sighed, pulling his tie completely off and tossing it onto a nearby chair. "Olivia, we've talked about this. I told you I'm trying." "I know," she said quickly, walking toward him. "And I see that. I see you trying, and I appreciate it. But it's not enough, Ryan. We're married, but sometimes it feels like I'm living with a stranger." Ryan's jaw tightened, and he turned away from her, pacing across the room. "It's not that simple." "But why not?" Olivia pressed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I don't understand why we can't move forward. Every night you kiss me, and it feels real, Ryan. It feels like there's something more, but you pull away every single time." "I'm afraid," Ryan said, his voice low but firm. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and vulnerability. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I'm afraid, Olivia. Afraid that if I let myself care too much, if I let you in completely, I'll end up broken again." Olivia stared at him, her heart breaking at the raw honesty in his words. She had known there was fear behind his distance, but hearing him admit it so plainly left her speechless for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was soft, gentle. "Ryan, I'm not her. I'm not going to leave you." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. That's what she said too, until she didn't. Olivia took a step closer to him, closing the gap between them. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension beneath his skin. "I understand that you've been hurt, and I'm not trying to downplay that. But I need you to trust me, Ryan. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We can't keep living like this, with this wall between us." Ryan looked down at her hand on his arm, his expression conflicted. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the ground, as if wrestling with something deep inside himself. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet. "I don't know how to let go of the past, Olivia. It's not something I can just turn off." "I'm not asking you to turn it off," she said softly. "I'm asking you to try. We're married, Ryan. I love you, and I want to be with you. But I can't keep living in this halfway space. I need you to meet me halfway too." Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. When he opened them again, there was a vulnerability there that Olivia had never seen before. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered. "You won't," she said, her voice firm. "You're hurting me more by keeping me at a distance." There was a long, heavy silence between them. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for Ryan to say something, anything, that would show her he was willing to take that next step. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll try," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do it right away, but I'll try." Olivia felt a surge of relief, even though she knew it wasn't a complete victory. It was something, a crack in the wall that had stood between them for so long. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to his cheek. "That's all I'm asking." That night, as they both prepared for bed, the routine was the same. Ryan came over to her side of the bed, leaning down to kiss her softly, his lips lingering against hers for just a moment longer than usual. But this time, instead of pulling away immediately, he stayed close, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night, Olivia," he whispered, his voice softer than usual, almost vulnerable. "Good night, Ryan," she whispered back, her heart aching with both hope and uncertainty. He still left the room after that, retreating to the guest room as he always did. But tonight, there was something different in the air. The wall between them wasn't gone, but it was crumbling, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia believed that they might actually find their way to each other. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she thought about all the nights they had spent like this, so close, yet so far apart. She knew that there were still challenges ahead, that Ryan's fear wouldn't disappear overnight. But she also knew that love was about more than grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about the willingness to try, to push past the fear and take a chance on something real. And Ryan had just promised to try. That was enough for now. The next morning, Olivia woke up with a strange sense of anticipation. She hadn't expected Ryan to change overnight, but a part of her hoped that last night's conversation had shifted something fundamental between them. As she made her way to the kitchen for breakfast, she found Ryan already there, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up as she entered, offering her a small, tentative smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Good morning," Olivia replied, feeling a flicker of warmth at the sight of him. It was a small thing, but his presence in the kitchen at this hour was unusual. Normally, they went about their mornings separately, only coming together later in the day. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, she glanced over at him, the silence between them comfortable for once. They didn't need to talk right now. The words had already been spoken. For the first time in months, Olivia felt like they were on the same side of the wall, like they were starting to dismantle it together. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed Ryan's promise to try brought a slow but steady change to their relationship. It wasn't a dramatic shift. There were no sweeping declarations of love or sudden outpourings of emotion. Instead, it was in the small things. The way Ryan lingered a little longer at breakfast, the way he would seek Olivia out for quiet moments of conversation, and, most importantly, the way his nightly kisses had grown more tender, more deliberate. Yet despite these small steps forward, Olivia could still feel the weight of the unspoken tension between them. There was something that Ryan was holding back, a final truth or fear that kept him from letting her all the way in. Olivia knew that the silence between them couldn't last forever. One evening, after another day of carefully navigating their way through business meetings and social events, Olivia decided that she couldn't wait any longer. She had been patient, more patient than she ever thought she could be, but the time had come to break the silence that had hovered between them for months. They were sitting in the living room, the city lights twinkling through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the room. Olivia sat curled up on the couch, her legs tucked under her, while Ryan sat in the armchair across from her, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He had been quieter than usual that evening, his mind seemingly elsewhere. "Ryan," Olivia said softly, breaking the silence. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Yeah?" "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what she was about to say. "I need you to be honest with me." Ryan's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "I'm always honest with you, Olivia." "I know," she said quickly, "but there's something you haven't told me, something important." Ryan sighed, setting his glass down on the table in front of him. "We've been over this. I told you everything about my past." "It's not just about your past," Olivia said, her voice firm but gentle. "It's about us, about why you're still holding back." Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Olivia, I've told you." "No," she interrupted softly, but with conviction. "You've told me that you're afraid, and I understand that. But it's more than that, isn't it? There's something else you're not telling me, and I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when I know there's a wall between us." Ryan was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the floor. Olivia could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands clenched into fists as he tried to find the words. Finally he spoke, his voice low and filled with a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. "It's not easy for me to explain, Olivia. I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix anything," Olivia said softly, leaning forward. "You just have to talk to me. Let me in. I'm your wife, Ryan. I want to help you, but I can't do that if you keep shutting me out." Ryan's eyes met hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a crack in the armor he had been wearing for so long. There was pain in his gaze, but there was also something else, something raw and real. He stood up abruptly, pacing across the room as if he couldn't sit still any longer. You don't understand, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to do this, Olivia. I don't know how to be the man you need. Olivia's heart clenched at his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. I don't need you to be perfect, Ryan. I just need you to be honest with me. Ryan stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with anguish. What if I can't give you what you want? What if I'm not enough? Olivia stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of him. She reached out, gently placing her hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. You are enough, Ryan, she whispered. You've always been enough, but you have to let me in. You have to trust me. Ryan closed his eyes, his breathing uneven. I'm afraid I'll hurt you, Olivia. You won't, she said firmly. The only thing that hurts me is feeling like you're still keeping me at a distance. We've come so far, Ryan, but there's still this barrier between us, and I don't know how to tear it down. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of his fear and vulnerability. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. You won't, she promised. But if we keep living like this, if we keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not, we're both going to end up miserable. We need to talk about what's really going on. Ryan swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to the window as if he couldn't bear to look at her. It's just, after everything that happened with my ex-fiancée, I've been terrified of letting anyone in again. I thought if I kept things at a distance, I wouldn't get hurt. I thought I could protect myself. Olivia's heart ached for him, for the man who had been hurt so deeply that he had built walls so high even love couldn't easily scale them. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his cheek, gently guiding his gaze back to hers. I understand why you're afraid, but we can't live in fear, Ryan. Not if we're going to make this marriage work. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, his breath shaky. I don't know how to let go of the fear. You don't have to do it all at once, Olivia said softly. But you have to try. We both do. For a long moment, Ryan stood there, his face inches from hers, his breath warm against her skin. Olivia could feel the tension between them, the raw, unspoken need that had been building for months. And then finally, Ryan's resolve broke. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and kissed her. Not the gentle, restrained kiss she had grown used to, but something deeper, more desperate. Olivia felt her heart surge as she kissed him back, her hands tangling in his hair, holding him as tightly as she could. When they finally pulled away, both of them breathless, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you. It's okay, Olivia whispered back, her voice trembling with emotion. We'll figure this out together. But no more walls, Ryan. No more silence. He nodded, his arms still wrapped around her. No more walls, he promised. I'm ready to try. Olivia smiled, her heart full of hope for the first time in months. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There would still be challenges ahead, and they would have to work through them together. But it was a beginning. For the first time in their marriage, the silence between them had been broken, and in its place, there was something far more powerful: understanding. Later that night, as they lay in bed together for the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia felt Ryan's hand gently tracing patterns along her arm. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. The wall between them wasn't gone completely, but it was crumbling, piece by piece. And as she drifted off to sleep in Ryan's arms, Olivia knew that they had finally taken the first step toward building something real. Something that could last. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. For the first time in months, Olivia woke up in bed next to Ryan. The feeling of his arm draped across her waist was new, yet it felt as though it should have always been this way. She lay there for a moment, savoring the warmth of his presence, the sound of his even breathing. It was a small victory, but to her, it was monumental. Last night had been a breakthrough, a moment when Ryan had finally let her in. She turned her head slightly to look at him, and a small smile crept across her face. His expression was peaceful, free from the tension that usually lingered in the tight set of his jaw and brow. He looked so different when he wasn't guarded, when he wasn't keeping the world, and her, at arm's length. Olivia gently traced a finger along his cheek, feeling the roughness of his stubble, the softness of his skin. Ryan stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He blinked a few times, adjusting to the light, before his gaze focused on Olivia. For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as though he was remembering everything that had happened the night before. But then his face softened, and he smiled, a small, tentative smile, but one that reached his eyes. "Good morning," Olivia whispered, her voice warm and filled with hope. "Good morning," Ryan replied, his voice still husky with sleep. He shifted slightly, pulling her closer. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here when I woke up." "I wasn't planning on going anywhere," she said with a smile, resting her head against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. It was a comforting sound, one that made her feel like they were finally in sync. For a long time, they lay there in silence, simply enjoying the rare quiet moment between them. It was the kind of moment Olivia had dreamed of, one where they could just be, without the weight of expectations or the tension of unspoken words hanging over them. Eventually, though, Olivia knew they couldn't stay in this bubble forever. She had to know what last night meant, whether it was a fleeting moment or the beginning of something real. She propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at Ryan, her expression serious but soft. "Ryan," she began carefully, "what happens now?" He looked up at her, his eyes searching hers for a moment. "What do you mean?" "I mean, last night was a big step. But I need to know where we go from here," she said gently, not wanting to pressure him, but needing to understand. "I don't want us to go back to how things were before." Ryan sat up, leaning back against the headboard, running a hand through his hair. He looked conflicted, as though he was weighing his words carefully. "I don't want to go back to that either, Olivia. I want things to be different." "Different? How?" Olivia asked, sitting up next to him, her eyes locked on his. "What do you want, Ryan?" He let out a long breath, his gaze dropping to the blanket for a moment before meeting hers again. "I want to be the husband you deserve. I want to let go of the past and be with you. Fully." Olivia's heart skipped a beat at his words, but she didn't let herself get too carried away. "But?" Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, a familiar gesture of uncertainty. "But I'm still scared. Last night, it felt right, but I'm not going to pretend like everything is magically fixed. I'm trying, Olivia. I really am. But this isn't going to be easy for me." Olivia nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. She didn't expect everything to be perfect overnight. She knew that love wasn't about instant fixes or fairy tale endings. It was about the effort, about trying to grow together. "I don't need it to be easy," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "I just need you to keep trying, to keep taking those steps forward with me." Ryan squeezed her hand, his gaze softening. "I will, I promise." For the first time since their marriage, Olivia believed him completely. There had been promises before, but this time felt different. This time, it felt like they were truly on the same page. The days that followed felt like a tentative dance, one step forward, one moment of uncertainty, but always with the promise of something better. Ryan was different, not just in the small ways, but in the way he carried himself around her. There was a warmth to him now, a willingness to be present that hadn't been there before. He no longer retreated to the guest room at night. Instead, they shared the same bed, and while intimacy was still new and fragile, there was a sense of comfort in the physical closeness. Every night, Ryan kissed her goodnight, but now there was no hesitation, no fear that he would pull away. One evening, after dinner, they sat on the couch together, talking about the future, something that had once felt like a topic too dangerous to touch. They discussed business decisions, upcoming social events, and even future travel plans. But for the first time, the conversation turned personal. "Have you ever thought about having a family?" Olivia asked carefully, unsure of how Ryan would respond. Ryan's expression shifted, but not in the way she feared. He didn't shut down or avoid the question. Instead, he looked thoughtful, as though it was something he had considered, but never allowed himself to imagine. "I used to," he admitted, his voice quieter. "Before everything happened with my ex, I thought about it a lot. But after she left, I couldn't see myself trusting anyone enough to get there." "And now?" Olivia asked, her heart beating a little faster. Ryan met her gaze, his eyes soft and filled with something that looked like hope. "Now, I think it's something I want again, but only if you do." Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I do." It was another step forward, a conversation that had once seemed impossible, now filled with promise. They weren't rushing into anything, but they were talking about a future together, something that had once felt so far out of reach. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Ryan turned to face Olivia, his expression serious but gentle. "I know I've hurt you, Olivia, and I know that I haven't been the husband you needed me to be." Olivia shook her head, placing her hand on his chest. "Ryan, you've always been enough. You've just been scared, and I understand that. But we're here now. We're moving forward." He nodded, his eyes shining with something she hadn't seen before. Relief, maybe even peace. "I love you," he whispered, the words so quiet but so full of meaning. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. It was the first time he had said it, really said it. And in that moment, it felt like all the walls that had stood between them were finally gone. "I love you too," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. They held each other close that night, their hearts beating in sync for the first time. It wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning. But as they lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, Olivia knew that they had finally taken the first real step toward a future built on love, trust, and the promise of a life together. And that was all she had ever wanted.